Actually, though, if we could just wait for a sec, Oliver just popped out to
Yeah, I
go.
was just going to say, where's Oliver?
Yeah, he just popped out to go ask Rabbi Camille a question. Oh,
Oh,
there it is. We're good.
there he is. Okay. Was there anybody else last week, or weren't there six people?
Yeah, we're missing Reese today.
Should we wait or
No, she hasn't been here yet, so I think we are okay to start.
okay,
And we take all our notes and stuff, so she'll have access to that.
okay, great. Okay. Hope you all are doing well. Did you have a nice Memorial Day weekend, or did you have to study?
Not much out of classwork for this class for me personally.
Okay, that's good. Good.
Just a little bit of Cedar readings.
Uh-huh. Okay. So I assume you have some more questions to ask. I hope our session last week was good for you.
Yeah, it was incredibly informative.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I actually have a follow-up question to start us off from that last session.
Sure.
Yeah, so I remember that you talked specifically about a period of time where women felt uncomfortable at Shahar Zahav and felt like they had to leave. And so I was just wondering, like, in what way did the new emphasis that was put on feminism bring those female attendants and with that, like the lesbians back to Shahar Zahav?
Uh-huh. I think it was the at the time we started, there was a male rabbi, and there was some kind of I don't know exactly because it was pretty early in my experience there. Some feeling that there was some sexism involved. But I think it was the AIDS epidemic that actually began to bring a lot of the women back together again. So I don't know that it was exactly feminism, but I think that might have been the time when the prayer book was rewritten to and not just be about males, the Lord and he did this, but it was non-gender specific. Um, so I think that probably attracted more women. I could be inaccurate about that, but I think that, and then at least once the AIDS epidemic began to blossom, and that's probably the wrong word, but then there was a lot of women's support for the men.
Elizabeth, do you want to ask the next question now?
Yeah, I've been waiting for a second if anyone has like a follow-up question to this one, but if it's not the case, I would like to ask you, Alan, if you can tell us some of your like highlights as a Jewish LGBTQ plus identified person that took place for you from the time of the Stonewall riot in 1968 until the onset and your awareness of HIV/AIDS.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned last week, I really felt myself as Jewish. And then that whole 60s, well, the 70s rather, the early 70s, I was in a sort of bisexual phase. And I kept my Jewish identity pretty compartmentalized. Um, but there was this part of me that I think was grappling with, is it possible to be Jewish and gay at the same time? I certainly had Jewish friends, and I never doubted my own Jewish identity or questioned it. I'd always felt, very comfortable with that. But the phase I went through in the 70s of trying to figure, having a divorce from a woman and then going through a bisexual phase. And like I said, it was that in 1978 when I went to the uh, memorial service for Harvey Milk, and I was just struck with here are all these gay and Jewish people. That was kind of the integration of the two identities for me, and as as I joined Shar Zahav in 1979, and began to feel the sense of community there, I was much more comfortable with both identities. And then the I think what happened once the AIDS epidemic started, um, we knew very, very little about it at the time. I think the first diagnosed person was in 1981. And, I was kind of thinking, oh, well, Jewish guys wouldn't get AIDS, or they weren't even calling it that. But I remember very well when our first congregant did get it in 1982, sorry. And then he passed away the following year. It was really scary. It was a sense of, well, if this guy can get it, so can everybody else. And it gradually, from 83, 84, 85, it began to increase. And the the advice was don't have unprotected sex, and did that. But I mean, my own personal experience of this, I was with my first male partner from I met him in late 79, and we bought a house together and lived together until 1985. And quite frankly, we were almost like just not very aware. I mean, we didn't know about HIV at that early, and we weren't necessarily um, monogamous or anything. There was a lot of sexual activity going on. And by the time 1983 came along and this congregant passed away and other people were getting it, we said, okay, that's it, no more other people. But at the time, we didn't know, there were no tests or anything like that. So I didn't know. I mean, I figured by 1983 we were no longer messing around. Um, my own personal story, I turned 40 in 1986. I was really thinking of having a child. And by that time, they had tests they had just, I think within that year, had developed a test. So the month after my 40th birthday, I got myself tested and I found out I was HIV positive. So, but that wasn't recent, so I figured I must have been positive for 3 years or something like that. So and knock on wood, I'm still here. And but it was very, very depressing. And the whole congregation was deeply affected, and people got together to provide help for people who were getting sick and passing away. Um, it was a real crisis time. Even when I was president of the synagogue in 1991 to 93, the first 3 or 4 months, there were 13 congregants who died. I lost about 70 people that I knew. They weren't all really good friends, but I had some very, very good friends that passed away. So the congregation really united. They had a program where people would bring food to sick people. It was a whole um, support group that helped people who were ailing and so on. Um, I remember starting a group. It was a support group for HIV positive people, but I could only do it for less than a year because it was too depressing, because people would be okay, looking okay, and then they would get sick and then they would die. It was just too much to handle. So I stopped that. Um, so I was sort of mildly depressed for 3 years or so. And then as I seemed to be still alive by like the late 80s or something. And then they did start getting some medications uh, to to help people. Not that they necessarily did any good at that time, but I began to feel, okay, I'm still waking up in the morning. I can go to work. I'm still alive. So I kind of got over that depression. But being in the synagogue in that community, I mean, it's like there would be a funeral, you know, fairly often. And for people in their 30s and 40s to be dealing with death like that, it was, just incredibly, unusual for that age. And it was pretty traumatic. And, I don't know if you've read some history about the movements all over the country. I mean, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, didn't even acknowledge it until Rock Hudson, who was a famous actor, got it. And then, he acknowledge that, yes, there are lots of people dying of this, and we need to do something about it. Um, but I was very proud to sort of address Elizabeth's question. I mean, I felt very supported as part of the congregation, knew that there were people there if I needed support. There would be people there to support me or anybody else. Um, so, being part of that community, and that really, it helped merge the gay and the Jewish identity, because, it was called, AIDS was really identified as a disease that hit gay men. Now we know that there are women who've gotten it, and straight people who've gotten it. People got it from taking drugs and sharing needles and all that sort of thing. But at the time, it was all about, this is a gay male disease. And so just being part of a community, and particularly knowing that I had it too, um, you know, just made me feel so much more part of both identities. I don't know if that helps answer that question, but that's a pretty good question.
Do you think one portion of that you could talk about a little more is the Stonewall riot connection?
Well, that's very interesting. Because in 1969, when that happened, that's the year I married my ex-wife, and that was June, and I married in December. And I thought about that a lot. I don't think it was publicized very much here in the Bay Area. Now I could probably look, um, in the San Francisco Chronicle from back then and see if it was actually mentioned, but I don't remember there being a lot of publicity about that. And at the time, I was, kind of focused on, well, there was a lot else going on in my life. I had just enlisted in the Army Reserve, and I was scared to death about, what that whole process was going to be like. So I can't say that I was affected by that. By 1972 or so, they started pride parades and so on here. I remember, I think the first time I participated in one was in 1977, and I was just finishing my PhD. And I remember that there was a Briggs Amendment. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It was a California state proposition that was going to prevent gay and lesbian people from working in education. And I was getting my degree in school psychology, and I was really worried about that, thinking like, is this going to pass? And will I have just spent 5 years getting a PhD, and I'm not going to be able to be employed? So that the 1970s really blossomed here in San Francisco about gay rights, gay and lesbian rights. But I can't say that I was affected by Stonewall directly. Um, I think I wasn't even aware of it here. So obviously I learned about it later, but it took a few more years for gay and lesbian rights to be publicized here in the Bay Area, and then pride parades and so on.
Thank you for sharing all of your experiences. I was wondering if there were any other important memories or life experiences or lessons that took place between 1981 until maybe the early years of the 21st century of your life. Anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah. Um, yeah, sure. It's 20 years of life. Well, uh, like I said, I got more and more involved. My first partner was actually the first president of the synagogue. So, and I was treasurer at that point. I did I was a pretty good participant in the synagogue activities. One of the things, I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but one of the things I enjoyed very, very much was Megillah Madness. Megillah is the story of Esther for the holiday of Purim. And we used to, some people would write these plays, musicals, um, that would do the story, but would sort of have a gay or lesbian theme. And we would dress up. I mean, I could show you pretty funny pictures of me. And my favorite one was in 1986 when we did um, a play called Polyester. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's actually a movie with a drag queen, big guy playing a female role, and so so there was a lot of fun, and it was so important because of what was going on with the AIDS epidemic. You know, it was great to have times to laugh and to enjoy ourselves when this other big part of our life involved illness and death. So those were really good experiences. Then in 1990, I was a vice president and then became the first 2-year president of the synagogue. I was 45 then. And, I loved it. It was a top experience of my life, where I learned about planning and what were the values. One of the funny things that still exists, you may remember from the service the little pamphlet that they showed, which had the daily or the weekly news, and other people who were sick or dying or whatever, but or died. But they're now printing the color of it. So when I was president of the synagogue, just to be kind of cute about it, there would be a pamphlet, and I would hold it up and I would name the color. Well, that's the one tradition that is still um, still holding, is naming the color of and I started that back in 1991. But that's silly, but it was still fun to do. But I really enjoyed leading the Vaad, which is the board of directors. Um, and I think we were very productive in really developing what are the most important values of the synagogue that we want to promote. So that was, I felt successful at that time. And of course, a lot of it was what can we continue to do to support people who are sick, and so on. So, and I learned really how to manage uh, board meetings and differences of opinions. Um, in my job as a school psychologist, I had to do that with kids sometimes, but not with adults. And so it was really a very growth experience for me. And then later on in the late 90s, I guess another aspect of my synagogue connection. My I Back in 1980, I had met two women, and they subsequently separated. One of them, Nancy, well, I'm friend. One of them, actually, Irene, is on this. Um, she's doing her part of this too. Her girlfriend then was Nancy, and they split up in the early 80s, and I stayed friends with Nancy. Nancy found another person named Marilyn in the late 80s, and in 1993, they had a child. Marilyn had a child named Daniel, and they asked if I would be his godfather. And I said yes. So I've known him since the day he was born. And unfortunately, Marilyn passed away from ovarian cancer, I believe, when Daniel was not even 4 years old. So I really became like his father. And if it weren't for the synagogue, that wouldn't have happened. He is like a son to me, and we talk every week. He lives in LA now, and he just turned 30 about 5 months ago. So, but again, if it hadn't been for my connections in the synagogue, I wouldn't have had this tremendous gift. And so there were a lot of synagogue uh, movements that in the 90s, there began to be more children. They set up a religious school. There began to be B'nai mitzvahs when kids turned 13. There were more straight families that joined the synagogue. Um, so it was really a period of growth. And then we moved from we bought our current um, site on Dolores and 16th. We had been on Danvers Street in the Upper Castro area. So it was a lot of growth. And I was on committees to hire new rabbis and that kind of thing. And set up plans for, like 5-year plans and so on. So I kept my activity. Oh, another thing that I started, and it's beyond the early. It was 2008. Um, I I was asked by somebody, would I start a group for gay dads? And so this was gay men, either single or paired, partnered, who had little children. And they were all adopted. And so I started this group, and we're still in existence 16 years later. The kids at the time were from 2 to 7. Now they're 18 to 22. And it was so wonderful for me to do this, because these dads, all these kids, I don't know if you know about adopted kids, but they often have problems. I mean, that some of their birth parents were drug addicts and things like that, and even if they were adopted very young. So we would meet monthly and share their questions about raising their kids. And a lot of them they all ended up in special education because they all had some kind of either emotional or cognitive or attention problems. And these dads were so wonderful. Now we're a little bit smaller group because some people have left, but I still do it every month, and we are like a family. And then about 3.5 years ago, I started another group for just regular parents. So we meet once a month also, and it gives parents really an opportunity to talk about raising their children and all the challenges of that. And so that I'm really proud of having done that and continuing it. It really it was kind of because I was asked, because I was a school psychologist and did groups for kids, but doing this for parents was a wonderful, and I learned a lot myself. I really did learn a lot. And so those are some of the highlights of that period between 1981 and the early to mid 2000s there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure. Any?
So I guess we've touched on it a little bit, but are there any other ways outside of what you've discussed so far that Congregation Shahar Zahav responded to the AIDS crisis?
I'm trying to remember if there was a more, well, I think what they did was certainly work with other Reform Jewish synagogues to, pressure the government to start researching cures. I think another thing, Shahar Zahav was a leader actually in getting other synagogues to welcome LGBTQ people to their synagogues. We were one of the first 2 or 3 gay and lesbian synagogues in the country. There was one in New York and one in LA, and those are the only ones that I can think of. But and then when the AIDS crisis came, the working through the big Reform organization that really helped make the other synagogues aware and to be able to support people through the AIDS crisis. I'm trying to think of what else we did. I mean, other than just really taking care of our own congregants, and supporting people through loss of partners and so on, and doing funerals and so on. Trying to think of anything else, but I can't think of anything else. I'm sorry. But the being part of the general Reform Jewish organization, that certainly spread the message that this was a crisis and everybody had responsibility for, support.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure.
If I could just ask like a slight follow-up to that, do you think that you could explain if there is a way that Judaism looks at, perceives, and helps people with HIV and AIDS, or if there's something specific about like ritual burial practices or like a blessing for healing or anything like that?
Oh, well, yes, definitely the blessing for healing. I think you were at the services the other night. There's what's called a Misha Berach, and it is a weekly prayer for healing. And in that prayer, you can read in the prayer book, it does mention people with AIDS and other conditions. So it was first written, as far as I know, or at least ours was written during the AIDS epidemic to pray for people who were sick. But now a lot of people don't have it, but they're still, there's cancer and other diseases that people have. But yeah, that's built into our services, that prayer for healing. Now I assume that it was probably there before AIDS, but I don't particularly remember back in 1980 or something like that, saying that, but I'm sure we did. Well, I can't say I'm sure because I can't remember, but definitely once AIDS happened, that became a weekly prayer.
Thanks. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Moving on with the next question. This is also in regards to Sahav, sorry. And then
Yeah.
also just like during your life, like what did you do around volunteerism?
Oh, well, that's one of the strongest ethics of Shar Zahav. There are many synagogues that, all the services are run by rabbis but from the very beginning, Shar Zahav was a very big encourager of volunteerism. So we've had many different committees, committees to recruit people, ritual committees, financial committees. I mean, if you look on the website, it probably lists about 20 different committees. So all of that would depend on volunteerism, and people could volunteer to participate in co-lead services. You saw that last week. Give the drash, the sermon, so people could volunteer to do that. People volunteer to hand out prayer books, to greet people. So there's a lot of, I mean, frankly, the whole synagogue depends on volunteerism. There was even volunteer dues at times. They weren't fixed. They were originally a small amount of fixed dues, and then that's changed over the years. And obviously, you volunteer to be on the Va'ad, the board. The only paid employees are the cantor, the rabbi, and then there's the executive director, and obviously custodian people are paid, but and then I think the person who runs the Beit Sefer, which is the religious school. So, but most of it's depend on, and some of the teachers there have been volunteers. So, yeah, volunteerism is really one of the strongest messages. Basically, this synagogue could not function without volunteers. So, yeah, it's and then different. Not everybody volunteers. Some people just come to the services, but there's always been. Do I want to say a push? There's always been encouragement to volunteer. Um, and and depending on people's health condition and age, there's volunteering for providing the oneg. The oneg, you didn't see it last week, but oneg is just the after service snacks and socializing, but somebody has to provide the food for that and set up the food. So there's definitely lots of volunteer opportunities and lots of committees to volunteer, and some have been constant, and some are not. They ebb and flow. But does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure.
So that means that when you were when you were president, that was all volunteerism from you?
That's all volunteer. I didn't get paid a penny.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, it was at the time it was kind of like at least a quarter-time job. So, and you got to have the energy to do it, because, you have to run meetings, and you have to, talk to congregants if they want to, if they have a complaint or a question or a request or something like that. So yeah, it's definitely volunteer.
Is Shahar Zahav based on is it a nonprofit, or you pay to go to services?
Well, it's nonprofit, but you do pay dues. So it costs more or less about $3,000 a year per person, but some people can't afford that. Other people can afford more than that. And there's always, well, that's another volunteer, is raising money. There's what's called a rainbow fund for extra money. So there's the dues, and then there's different funds, and there are volunteers who will solicit money from congregants. But it's generally it's a nonprofit. We're not trying to make profit. And then there's another committee, that an endowment committee, usually formed from the last 5 presidents, to raise money. So people putting Shar Zahav in their wills, so that we build up that money. So when we need it, either for maintenance or, a new program or something like that, it's there. So, but for a long time, I mean, the synagogue will be 47 years old this year. And but for a long time there was, I would say, a struggle, or it wasn't like we were loaded with money. But I think we're more financially secure now. But it is nonprofit.
Thanks for answering that.
Yeah.
You also touched on this a little bit. I have a follow-up. Well, you also touched on this a little with what you did to keep yourself, sane during this time period.
Yeah.
But I'm also wondering a little more about self-care. If there was any, since there weren't like medicinal treatments, if there was anything that you did to try and keep yourself feeling well and mentally well along with the support groups.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I mean, I think it's something that everybody has to do all the time, frankly. I mean, the world we live in is very challenging, and to try to keep yourself sane and happy. So I guess what I did, I'm a very busy and a very social person. Um, so after I broke up with my first partner, I was alone for about a year, and then I met my next partner, and we were together 8 years. Um, and both of them ended up being HIV positive. So, but both we all survived from that. Both the two of them have passed away in the last 2 or 3 years. But so, being with a person, having my house to take care of. My job was totally my savior, I would say, because I would go to work every day, work with kids, work with parents. So it kept my mind off of that, am I going to die? And until so in the late 80s and there were some medications like something called AZT, and there were other things. AL-721 or something made out of eggs. I mean, I would try things, that had some publicity about being health, to stop the AIDS. So I tried that, but mostly I just, keeping busy, and that worked, and my job really helped. And then starting in, I guess maybe it was 1995, they started AZT. That's when that was a medicine and I took that for 10 years. So I felt a little bit safer, and the death rate started to decrease after the middle 90s. But and then I found my current partner in 1995 also. Yeah, but what I'm going through now with him is, your question is totally relevant. He has Parkinson's disease. He's in the hospital. He's never coming home again. So it's really a challenge. And being my age, everybody, I mean, not everybody, but lots of people I know are getting sick and dying. It's so enjoy you're all in your 20s, I presume. Um, your early 20s or late teens, whatever. But it's life is a challenge, and my job these days is to keep myself occupied and try to find enjoyable things, like, for example, this. I love doing stuff like this, and working with younger people who may either just be interested in stories or actually learn something, if there's any advice. So, you know, keeping sane and enjoying life it's a challenge throughout your life. And it certainly was during the AIDS epidemic, but I had when I met Allan, and that's my husband, in 1995, we moved in the following year. My mom passed away that year, and we remodeled the house, and we had pets. Pets is another thing that, really helps. If you have cats or dogs or whatever, that can distract you from, the more challenging things in life. So, and travel. And, just even now going to synagogue on Friday nights is, that helps. So this last year, I retired last June, and, I never wanted to. I was going to work till I was 80. And, it's just, so your question is very, very relevant. And you never know what life is going to present where you really have to keep yourself, um, sane, and it's not drugs and it's not alcohol, that's not going to do it. Um, and I think friendship really helps a lot. Um, and there's been research on older people that one of the most, I won't say dangerous, but I will say dangerous things is isolation. And, for old people who live alone and don't have, social interactions. So, certainly during the AIDS epidemic, just being with other people, not just from synagogue, but friends and work, that all really helped and continues to help. That's probably more than you wanted to know, but
My next question, I think we also kind of touch on this topic, but are there any rituals or Jewish customs that help you during this time? You mentioned like regularly visiting the synagogue on Friday evenings.
You mean during this time or that time? You mean like
mm,
now or back
Back in the days.
in the days? Okay. Well, I always went to high holiday services. Those are always um, uplifting and educational. So that's New Year and Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, where they're times of reflection. And the Day of Atonement's the most serious ritual holiday. Um, and you think about, okay, what sins have I committed? What do I need to apologize for? What's my next year going to be looking like? What can I do to be a better person? So those are all strong, reflective times. Um, Passover, I've always loved, with mainly because of food, but that the Seder is the dinner that you have to celebrate Passover, the escape of the Jews from Egypt. Um, and I've had a very interesting tradition there. Back in 1961, I was friends with a guy. We were sophomores in high school, and his parents invited my parents and me, and he was an only child, and there were like two other sets of parents with only boys. And we started having seders at their house. And of course, all the parents are gone now. And my friend, he passed away 7 years ago, but the groups changed, but it was a wonderful gathering, and we still do it. So there's a family that I switch back and forth years for hosting. It's um, uh, potluck, everybody brings something, but and we read the Haggadah, and it's a 3 hour, with the reading the service and the meal, and it feels very, very much like family. And so it's a ritual that has become, a real tradition. So now this is like 63 years that we've been doing this. So I don't know how long we'll be able to do it, but still, I enjoy that. Yeah, I mean, there are other religious, Jewish holidays and ritual, but those are the main ones: Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover. Oh, and Hanukkah, lighting the candles and during Christmas time. When I was growing up, we celebrated, but my parents actually, we did get Christmas trees actually, until I put an end to it when I got confirmed from Temple Emmanuel. It was kind of a combination of these trees are getting too expensive. At the time, it went up from $1 to $4 or something like that. But when I was confirmed in 1962, I said, I'm Jewish. We don't need a Christmas tree anymore. But um, we always lit the Hanukkah candles. And other people will celebrate Sabbath, lighting candles and having a challah. It's like what you saw at the services the other night, the wine and the challah and the blessings. I was never that religious. My family wasn't that religious, so I don't do that on Friday nights. But other people do. But that depends on, their own background and, how religious they are. Um, but yeah, I enjoy the rituals that there are. But the main ones are the ones that I said, the high holidays. Even when I stopped going to Temple Emmanuel, I would still go there for high holidays, like with my parents, or find places at Berkeley to do that when I was at school there. And, but yes, Shar Zahav rescued me from that because then that was easy, to do that.
Wow, that's so impressive for how long you've been able to like keep the traditions, like the gathering and stuff. It's
Yeah, yeah.
cool.
Well, it gives you, sort of, I won't say routine, but it's nice to have some rituals established and you keep following them. And since they're different times of the year, you can look forward to them and, still keep on doing them. I mean, I have the same sort of tradition for Thanksgiving. I've been hosting Thanksgiving for many years and do the cooking and have, family and and friends at this point. And that's a nice tradition too. Not religious, but you know, I'm sure you all celebrate Thanksgiving, or most of you do anyway.
So I guess since you mentioned it, I think I'm probably the only one here, but I've actually attended in person both Temple Emmanuel and Temple Shahar Zahav in the
Oh,
past. And so I have both very beautiful buildings, especially Emmanuel is just stunning, right? But
yeah, they're remodeling it now.
it's a castle.
Yeah, right.
I'm just wondering, I mean, do you attend Emmanuel now at all? And if so, I mean, obviously there's the queer difference, but how is Emmanuel as a Reformed synagogue with managing the AIDS epidemic and also just with queer justice in general?
Um, I'm not totally sure. I know that there have been um, gay and lesbian people that do go to Emmanuel rather than um, Shar Zahab. Maybe it's just because they like the Reform service. When I was going there, I don't know if they still have it, but they had a choir. They still do. Yeah. Okay. I
Well, I
was,
know I was there for the high holidays, so I'm
yeah,
not they always have a choir, but they did have a lovely. I was there for Rosh Hashanah and it was a
yeah.
choir.
I mean, it really is. It feels very sort of like formal production. Certainly when I was there as a kid, and I was bar mitzvahed there, and I was married there. My idol was the rabbi, the senior rabbi, who was. I don't have that many idols, but Fine, who was the senior rabbi when I was when I was a kid. I really, really looked up to him. Um, but it's very reform, it has the music but now, and Shar Zahav is much more informal. People make jokes sometimes, and they laugh, and it's just a lot less formal. But in a way, it's a little more. There's more Hebrew, although I think that's happened at Emmanuel in later years. When I went there, nobody wore a yarmulke or but I think they do now. I can't remember the last time I was there. I think maybe in 2012, it was our 50th anniversary of our confirmation, and I think they had a service and a celebration for our class then. But I don't know what they were doing as far as AIDS situations. I'm trying to remember. I think the Shar Zahav did work with them, to promote support and um, political. It's hard for religious organizations in general to be super political because they're nonprofits and otherwise they get taxed. But to encourage at least awareness, of the congregation. But but I think yeah, gay and lesbian people certainly do feel comfortable there now. Yeah, and if they like the services better than Shar Zahav, which I can understand, it's more of a production, rather than and less volunteerism, I think. Um, so, people may just, have grown up with strict formal Judaism and would go there instead of Shar Zahav. Okay, we've got 10 more minutes. Okay. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know entirely, but
No,
good.
it's just really interesting to hear about like someone discussing the two synagogues. So you would actually say in some ways that so Shahar Zahav is a little more formal, or Emmanuel is a little more formal.
Emmanuel's a little more formal. Yeah.
And it's
But Shar Zahav is a little more integrated, I think, because as I might have said last week, people, people join synagogues either based on its the sect of Judaism. Is it Reform? Is it Conservative? Is it Orthodox? Reconstruction? Or neighborhood? Okay, so where's the place closest to where I can go? However, Shar Zahav was created on a completely different, I won't say model, completely different basis, which was gay and lesbian. So people who are gay and lesbian, they could have been brought up Orthodox, they could have been brought up conservative, Reform. They might not have been religious at all. So the ritual of Shar Zahav had to be sort of an amalgam of all of the types of Judaism as opposed to just one. So that's why I say that when I first went there, there was a lot of Hebrew that I wasn't used to because Emmanuel didn't do a lot of Hebrew, for the regular part of the service. There was music that I wasn't familiar with. I used to love the music from Temple Emmanuel, which was all kind of based on German music. And because Reform Judaism, started in Germany in the 19th century. And so I had to adapt to different tunes and more Hebrew. And then, of course, the um, de-sexizing the liturgy, where, men and women are not it's not all about men. But now I don't know if they do, maybe you recognize that from when you were in um, at the service at Emmanuel. Have they done anything to degenderize some of the literature, or is it still he and the Lord and all that stuff?
yeah, it is still masculine centered. I have a little Hebrew as well, so I know the Hebrew hasn't been changed at least.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So you could see if you were looking at the prayer book for Jar Zahav, there's numbers of prayers have a masculine version and a feminine version. And of course, that doesn't include non-binary people and things like that. But so Emmanuel's still traditional in that way, traditional reform. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, Emmanuel is definitely more formal. You know, because it's a huge congregation, and you got this big audience, and Shar Zahav's just more intimate, I think.
Well, Emmanuel has such a history in the city as well,
Oh
being
yeah,
the first synagogue on this coast, basically. So
yeah, from like 1850 or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, so that's also interesting. Versus what year was Shahar Zahab founded again?
77,
Yeah.
1977.
Yeah. So quite a while. Um, yeah, we did finish up the questions that we had written, so I'm wondering if anyone else has anything they'd like to delve into a little more in the last 5 minutes.
I had one question. I know you were talking about how you were like a vice president or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering like what exactly you did like during your time as vice president. I'm just very curious.
I'm trying to think what I did too. Um, and when I was president, I had a vice president. I guess it was just kind of teamwork, helping the president with meetings, and I guess I'm trying to remember if I was responsible for a committee at that point. Um, I hate to say it, but it was like over 30 years ago, so trying to remember.
It doesn't have to be just as you being vice president, but I guess just your volunteer work at Shahar Zahav.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I was treasurer once and then president and vice president. And the gay dads group I do, that's all voluntary. Um, I'm trying, I guess trying to think. I haven't been so voluntary, in the last 10 years or something like that. But being on a committee to select a new rabbi, um, to develop I was on a committee to develop no, I can't remember what you call it, a plan for the next 5 years, that kind of thing. So, some people volunteer more, some people volunteer less, some people don't volunteer at all. Um, but and you go through phases, and it depends on the rest of your life, I mean, a lot of people don't have a lot of time to do their volunteer. Um, like we volunteered for shopping for a while, just for Onegs. Alan did that for a number of years. Um, yeah, so there's a lot of volunteer opportunities. Um, but not everybody does it, and not everybody does it continually either. So
Thank you for the answer.
sure.
Think we have time for one more, or do you think it's cutting it a
Yeah,
little?
we have 3 minutes. So Rabbi said she would come at 2:06.
So I guess we need to be a little speedy with this one, but I do actually have a question about sort of your background of psychology tying into what you talked about with self-care, because I was wondering if that had sort of any influence, I guess also combining with being Jewish, being gay, like if that kind of all culminated in a way in how you approach self-care or knew about various self-care practices or stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think what I've learned, I mean, through psychology is how we feel about ourselves, self-esteem, and because so much of self-care, I think depends on how we view ourselves. Do we view ourselves as decent human beings, as good people? Do we put a tremendous amount of pressure on ourselves? You know, self-care also involves balance and moderation and not demanding that you be perfect, you know, with everything. And so I think a lot of what I learned in working with kids has really helped me. I don't know if I don't think I mentioned it last week, but just dealing with anger, you know, and I'll tell you next time because it's a little bit longer story, but you know, it took me a long time to listen to myself what I would teach kids how to manage their own anger. Um, and you know, finally, it's a funny story actually, but I'll tell you next time. Um, so yes, so psychology is really critical in that, you know, how we treat ourselves, how we rate ourselves, think about ourselves, and what methods we have to calm ourselves down, to give ourselves pleasure, um, and you know, accept our mistakes. So all of that is, you know, an understanding of yourself that's critical.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, we have like 10, 15 seconds left, so
Yeah.
I can end the recording this time.
Okay.
A little less abruptly.
Are you the recording guy? Okay. I hope to see you tomorrow at services if any of you want to come.